On his clock. Scene 1. The Crimson Hourglass. The rhythmic, agonizingly fast ticking of a pocket watch. 10 hours. I just lost 10 freaking hours because he didn't like the formatting of the budget report. I slammed my forehead onto the polished mahogany desk, gripping my messy light brown hair in pure, unadulterated panic. With a trembling hand, I pulled the silver pocket watch from my belt and flipped it open. The magical holographic runes glowing above the glass dial were spinning entirely too fast. My personal life clock was literally bleeding away right before my eyes. I was Leo Vance, a 22-year-old chronomancy intern at the High Magical Council. Or, to be more precise, I was the idiot who had tried to cast a stabilizing time tether on a broken ancient artifact 2 days ago, messed up the incantation, and accidentally linked my own lifespan directly to the head of the council. My new master. My absolute nightmare of a boss, Arthur Sterling. The rules of this accidental curse were simple, terrifying, and deeply unfair. Our temporal energies were entangled. If Arthur was calm, my clock ticked normally. If Arthur was happy, my clock actually slowed down, giving me extra time. But if Arthur got irritated, stressed, or angry, my personal time accelerated like a runaway train. If he threw a full-blown tantrum, I could literally age to death in a matter of days. Sound effect. Heavy, elegant footsteps approaching in the hallway. My amber eyes went wide. The aura in the room suddenly grew freezing cold, vibrating with a heavy, oppressive blue temporal energy. He was coming, and judging by the temperature drop, he was already in a bad mood. Think, Leo, think. I muttered to myself, frantically straightening my crumpled white dress shirt and rolling down my sleeves. Survival strategy number 1. The boss must never, ever frown. The heavy double doors of the office swung open with flawless, intimidating precision. Standing on the threshold was Arthur Sterling. He looked like an aristocratic god of time who had just stepped off a dark fantasy runway. Tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in an immaculate, tailor-made 3-piece suit without a single wrinkle. His perfectly styled dark, silver-gray hair caught the ambient light, and his piercing icy blue eyes scanned the room, instantly radiating a cold aura of supreme authority. He was holding a stack of magical parchment, and his sharp, sculpted jaw was tightly clenched. A tiny, dangerous crease appeared right between his perfect eyebrows. Tick, 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 tick. My pocket watch in my pocket began to vibrate furiously, the gears screaming as my life hours started to rapidly drain away. He was annoyed. Very annoyed.
Vance, Arthur said, his deep, velvet baritone sending a cold shiver straight down my spine.
He threw the parchment onto his desk with a sharp snap. The magical anomaly report from the lower wards is completely missing its temporal variance calculations. Who authorized this garbage? I'll fix it. I practically shrieked, lunging across the room like a desperate cat before he could get even angrier. I snatched the papers, forcing the most dazzling, eager, and perfectly subservient smile onto my face. I will rewrite it from scratch, Master Sterling. In fact, I've already anticipated your complaints and brewed your favorite Earl Grey tea with exactly 2 drops of moonflower syrup to soothe your... to help you focus. Please, take a seat. Arthur froze, his icy blue eyes locking onto mine in sheer, unmitigated confusion. He blinked, staring at the perfectly warm cup of tea I had magically slid in front of him, and then down at my intensely devoted, slightly sweating face. Vance, Arthur murmured slowly, his tone suspiciously lowering. You've been my assistant for exactly 48 hours. Why do you look like your entire life depends on whether I take a sip of this tea? Internal monologue. Because it literally does, boss. It literally does. Scene 2. The perfect assistant routine. I just take my internship very seriously, Master Sterling. I let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh, casually pressing my flat hand against my trousers to muffle the frantic vibration of the silver watch. Arthur raised a single, sharp eyebrow. His gaze tracked my hand, his analytical mind clearly registering that something was amiss, but he chose not to press further. Instead, he gracefully slid into his leather chair, the silk of his dark navy vest catching the light. He reached out with long, elegant fingers and picked up a porcelain cup. He took a slow, measured sip. Instantly the dangerous crease between his brows vanished. The freezing blue aura that had filled the room dissolved like morning mist, and the frantic tick-tick-tick in my pocket slowed down to a gentle, steady, comforting throb. I let out a breath, I felt like I'd been holding for a century, my shoulders visibly sagging. Your dedication is unusual, Vance, Arthur said, setting the cup down with a soft click. He leaned forward, resting his sharp jaw on his steepled fingers. His icy eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. Most interns freeze in terror or actively look for excuses to leave the floor when I am in a foul mood. Yet you practically tackled me with hot beverages. Are you hiding an agenda? An agenda? Me? Never. I lied smoothly, clutching the messy report to my chest like a shield. I simply believe that a calm mind leads to flawless leadership. A stressed Grand Chronomage means a stressed magical council. I am merely looking out for the stability of our realm. Arthur continued to look at me for a few long seconds, his expression completely unreadable. Flattery does not erase poor formatting, Vance. However, the tea is acceptable. You have until tonight to fix the variance calculations. If it is not perfect by sunset, I will ensure your internship evaluations are less than pleasant. Internal monologue. If it's less than pleasant, his mood will drop, he'll get furious, and my life expectancy will shorten to next Tuesday. It will be immaculate, sir. I bowed deeply, almost knocking my head against his desk, and scrambled back to my workstation. Over the next 7 days, my life became a synchronized ballet of absolute desperation. I didn't just become an assistant, I became a psychic. I spent every waking hour memorizing Arthur Sterling's triggers. I learned that if his fountain pen ran out of enchanted obsidian ink, his jaw would clench, costing me 30 minutes of life. So I checked his pens 3 times a day. I learned that if the sunlight from the grand arched windows hit his desk at a direct angle between 2 and 3 in the afternoon, it gave him a slight headache, costing me 2 hours. So I became the fastest curtain closer in the history of the council. I bought a small notebook, scribbling down his habits like a mad scientist. Rule 4. The Earl Grey must be exactly 78 degrees Celsius. Any hotter, and he sighs. Side breaths cost me 5 minutes. Rule 12. Never let Senior Counselor Caleb speak to him before lunch. Caleb's voice increases Arthur's blood pressure, which causes my watch to scream. I was exhausting myself, running on pure adrenaline and cheap magical espresso, but it was working. My life clock was stable. For a whole week, I hadn't lost a single day. I was actually surviving. Until the monthly high-level summit arrived. Scene 3. The Boardroom Crisis. The grand hall of the Magical Council was packed with elderly, arrogant mages draped in heavy velvet robes, all arguing over the distribution of temporal ley lines. I stood discreetly in the shadow of the back wall, holding a heavy leather binder, my eyes darting nervously between the grand table and my pocket watch. Arthur sat at the head of the long table, looking like an unyielding king surrounded by bickering subjects. He hadn't spoken in an hour, but I could see the signs. His left index finger was tapping a slow, rhythmic beat against the wood. Tap, tap, tap. In my pocket, my watch gave a warning shudder. Tick, 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 tick. The lower wards do not deserve an equal share of the chrono reservoirs, yelled High Councillor Malachi, a stubborn man with a beard down to his knees. He slammed his fist on the table, right in Arthur's direction. They are reckless with magic. To give them more time energy is an insult to the founding bloodlines. Arthur's tapping stopped. The temperature in the grand hall plummeted instantly. Frost began to spiderweb across the glass water pitchers on the table. The oppressive, heavy blue temporal aura erupted from Arthur's shoulders, so thick it felt like gravity itself had doubled. Tick, 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 tick. My silver pocket watch didn't just vibrate. It grew searing high against my hip. I pulled it out slightly under my sleeve. The holographic numbers were cascading downward like a broken casino game. 7 days left. 6 days. 5 days. Oh, gods. He's going to execute them all, and I'm going to die of old age right here. I panicked, my vision blurring. My skin felt slightly dry. The curse was pulling my actual youth to fuel his temporal rage. Malachi, Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying absolute stillness that silenced the entire room. You speak of bloodlines as if your own ancestors didn't miscalculate the leap year anchor by an entire century. Do not lecture me on who deserves time. Are you questioning my lineage, Sterling? Malachi stood up, his face turning purple. Arthur's icy blue eyes flashed with a dangerous, lethal light. He began to stand up from his chair, his hands resting flat on the mahogany. The magical pressure in the room became so intense that several younger scribes near me dropped their pens, gasping for air.
3 days left. 2 days.
My watch was practically smoking. If Arthur let out his full magical wrath, my life clock would hit 0 before he even finished his sentence. I had no choice. It was either social suicide or actual death. Master Sterling! My voice bounced off the high-vaulted ceilings of the grand hall, loud, desperate, and completely out of line. Every single head in the room snapped toward the back wall. Dozens of ancient, powerful wizards stared at me in absolute shock. Arthur froze mid-motion, his icy eyes locking onto me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and cold fury at being interrupted. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to march forward, cutting right through the middle of the crowded room. I held up a small, elegant silver tray that I had secretly prepared beforehand, containing a single, delicate lavender-infused macaron and a glass of chilled moonflower water. I deeply apologize for the interruption. Esteemed counselors, I said, my voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. I forced my most dazzling, submissive smile, stepping right into Arthur's oppressive aura. But Master Sterling's strictly scheduled metabolic stabilization window has just arrived. As his personal assistant, it is my duty to ensure his health does not suffer during prolonged debates. Malachi gaped at me. Are you insane, boy? We are discussing the future of the kingdom's ley lines. And a kingdom cannot run without a healthy Grand Chronomage, I retorted instantly, placing the tray directly over Arthur's angry legal documents. I looked right into his icy blue eyes, my gaze pleading, desperate, begging for mercy. Please eat the cookie, boss. Please don't kill me. Arthur looked down at the tiny, perfect purple macaron, then up at my intensely pale, sweating face. He noticed how hard my hands were shaking as I held the tray. He looked at my pocket, where the faint red glow of my overheating watch was visible through the fabric. The silence stretching across the room was suffocating. Then, slowly, the tension began to bleed out of Arthur's shoulders. The frost on the water pitchers melted. He let out a slow, controlled breath, and the frantic ticking in my pocket immediately slowed down, saving me at the very last second. The intern is correct, Arthur spoke smoothly, though his eyes never left my face. He sat back down in his chair, picking up the small macaron with absolute elegance. A brief recess is granted. 10 minutes. Malachi, sit down before you have an apoplexy. I stumbled backward into the shadows, leaning against a pillar as the counselors broke into quiet, confused chatter. I opened my watch. Status restored. Remaining time normal. I slumped against the cold stone, wiping the sweat from my forehead. I had survived the boardroom crisis, but as I looked across the room, I noticed Arthur was still watching me, his cold eyes narrowed in deep, dangerous suspicion. He knew something was fundamentally wrong with his assistant, and I knew my time was running out. Act 2, The Whispers at the Deep Archives. Scene 4, The Penalty of Light. You have a lot of explaining to do, Vance. Arthur's voice cut through the damp, chilly silence of the deep archives like a silver blade. The room was buried 5 floors beneath the council's main building, a forgotten labyrinth where time itself felt heavy, stagnant, and smelling faintly of ancient parchment, dried ink, and ozone. Towering bookshelves stretched up into the shadows, filled with glowing, dust-covered chronomancy scrolls that hummed with repressed magical energy. I swallowed hard, keeping my hands jammed deep into the pockets of my oversized white shirt. I already explained, Master Sterling.
It was merely a mandatory health intervention. The council elders were raising your blood pressure, and I... Do not insult my intelligence, Arthur interrupted smoothly.
He shed his heavy navy coat, draping it with perfect precision over the back of an ornate Gothic chair, leaving him in just his dark silk waistcoat. He turned around, his piercing icy blue eyes locking onto mine with terrifying focus. You broke the absolute protocol of the High Council. You humiliated High Councilor Malachi. And you did it all while looking like you were about to face an executioner. Why? Tick, tick, tick. In the dead silence of the archives, my pocket watch gave a sharp, nervous shudder. Arthur was irritated by my deflection. Instantly, the digital holographic numbers under my cloth began to count down faster. 24 hours lost. 36 hours lost. I just care about your efficiency, sir. I squeaked, my voice dropping an octave as I frantically reached for a nearby stack of ancient, uncatalogued scrolls. Look, the temporal variance logs from the 19th century are completely out of order. Let's focus on the punishment. I am ready to work all night. Arthur stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The dangerous, sharp edge of his temporal aura flickered around his shoulders like cold blue flames. But instead of pushing further, he let out a sharp, exhaled breath and sat down at the heavy oak reading desk. Fine. If you are so eager to ruin your health for the sake of filing, you will catalog the Chronos manifests. Every single one of them.
By hand. Do not speak to me unless it is strictly work-related.
Yes, sir. Understood, sir. For the next 4 hours, the only sounds in the cramped archives were the scratching of Arthur's quill, the rustling of brittle parchment, and the agonizingly loud tick-tick-tick against my hip. I was running around him like a frantic ghost. If a draft from the ancient stone walls made the magical candles flicker, I immediately lunged forward to shield the flame, terrified that the sudden dimness would annoy him. If his inkwell ran low, I refilled it before he could even lift his pen. I was running on pure panic, my eyes burning from exhaustion. Every time Arthur shifted in his chair or let out a frustrated sigh over an illegible document, my watch would skip forward, stealing precious hours of my life. My skin felt tight and cold. I was literally burning through my life spent just to keep up with his workload. Scene 5. The Shattered Chain. Vance, I told you to stop hovering, Arthur murmured, his eyes still fixed on a complex magical map. Your frantic energy is becoming incredibly. Just organizing the reference index, Master Sterling. I rasped, my throat dry. I stretched my arms up, trying to reach a heavy, leather-bound tome on the very top shelf directly behind his chair. My fingers brushed the spine, but my vision suddenly blurred from a wave of sheer dizziness. My lack of sleep and the constant drain of the curse were finally catching up to me. My foot slipped on the smooth edge of the ornate floor rug. Whoa! I gasped, my balance completely vanishing. A heavy book slipped from my fingers, and I went tumbling backward, straight toward the hard stone floor. Arthur's reaction was terrifyingly instantaneous. Before I could even process my fall, his hand shot out with supernatural, time-altered speed. His strong, warm fingers wrapped tightly around my right wrist, his arm tensing as he forcefully yanked me forward, halting my descent just inches from the ground. Our bodies collided. I was pulled straight against his chest, the warmth of his skin cutting through the icy draft of the archives. The sudden physical proximity made my breath catch in my throat. I could smell his cologne, crisp winter air, cedarwood, and something uniquely electric. But as he caught me, the silver pocket watch snapped off my belt loop. It slid across the smooth oak desk, hitting a stack of papers with a loud clink, and flipped wide open right under the magical lamp. The holographic numbers were projecting brightly into the air between us. They weren't displaying the standard council time. They were glowing a violent, bleeding crimson, the gears inside spinning backward and forward in a chaotic, frantic frenzy, perfectly reflecting the spike in my adrenaline. Arthur's icy blue eyes locked onto the watch. He froze, his entire body going rigid. He looked at the frantic crimson runes, then slowly looked up at my pale, sweating face. His grip on my wrist tightened so much, it almost hurt, his thumb resting directly over my racing pulse. He didn't just see the watch. As a Grand Chronomage, he felt the invisible, vibrating magical tether connecting my heartbeat directly to his own temporal core. Vance. Arthur's voice dropped to a deadly, gravelly whisper that made my soul shiver. What is the meaning of this? Why is your individual life clock directly entangled with my personal energy? Tears of pure, overwhelming exhaustion and terror pricked the corners of my eyes. I couldn't lie anymore. I couldn't keep up the facade. I'm sorry, Arthur. I sobbed out, using his name without thinking. 2 days ago, the ancient time tether artifact. I messed up the incantation. I accidentally bound my clock to yours. If you get angry, my time accelerates. I'm literally dying because you're stressed. I closed my eyes tightly, burying my face into his shoulder, bracing myself for the ultimate explosion of his legendary rage. I waited for my watch to spin out of control, hit 0, and end my life right there in his arms. But the room didn't grow cold. Instead, a sudden, blinding warmth boomed in the dark archives. I opened my eyes to see Arthur staring down at me, his sharp features completely slackened by profound, unadulterated shock. The suffocating blue aura was gone, and in its place, a soft, radiating golden light emanated from his chest, wrapping around us both like a protective blanket. His breath hitched. He looked at my trembling hands, my pale face, and the desperate, subservient notebook sitting on the desk filled with his habits, all my frantic care, the perfect tea, the macaron at the meeting, the curtains. It wasn't because I was a clumsy, eager-to-please intern. It was because I was fighting a silent, terrifying war just to stay alive.
You absolute, reckless idiot, Arthur murmured. His voice wasn't angry.
It was shaking. It was filled with an immense, heartbreaking weight of guilt and a strange, raw vulnerability I had never heard from him before. He didn't let go of my wrist. Instead, his other hand slowly moved up, his warm palm cupping the side of my face, forcing me to look directly into his eyes. Why didn't you just tell me, Leo? Scene 6. The weight of gold. Tell you. I let out a weak, hysterical laugh, a single tear escaping and sliding down my cheek onto his fingers. You're the head of the Magic Council. You fire people for using the wrong color ink. If I told you I accidentally hitched a ride on your lifespan, I thought you'd vaporize me on the spot. Arthur's gaze softened, a flash of genuine pain crossing his beautiful, aristocratic features. His thumb gently wiped the tear from my cheek. Am I truly such a monster in your eyes? You intimidating boss, I whispered, my heart doing a completely different kind of frantic flip now. This time, it wasn't out of fear. His chest was pressed against mine, and the warmth radiating from him was making my stomach feel entirely too light.
I have spent 10 years carrying the weight of this realm on my shoulders, Arthur said quietly, his voice echoing softly in the dark archives. He didn't pull away.
If anything, he leaned slightly closer, his breath dusting my lips. Every day is a battle against incompetence, corruption, and chaos. Anger was the only shield I had left to keep this council from falling apart. But to know that my burdens, my anger, was actively killing you. He looked down at the silver pocket watch on the desk. Because he was currently in a state of absolute calmness and deep, protective sorrow, the golden light of his aura bled into the watch. Clink, clink, clink. The bleeding crimson numbers vanished. The holographic dial turned a beautiful, serene gold. Our hands began to spin backward with incredible speed, rapidly adding days, weeks, and months back to my lifespan. My skin instantly felt warmer, the exhaustion washing out of my muscles as my lost time was forcefully returned by his own sheer willpower. From this moment on, Arthur whispered, his icy eyes holding a fierce, unyielding promise as he looked back at me. I will not let your clock drop by a single second. If I must change my entire nature to keep you alive, Leo, then I will do exactly that. My face flushed a deep, burning crimson. I was still pinned against his chest, wrapped in his golden light, and for the first time since this nightmare started, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want him to let me go. Act 3. The New Rules of Engagement. Scene 7. The Unprecedented Kindness. The High Magical Council was on the verge of a collective nervous breakdown. Not because of a dark magic invasion or a temporal anomaly, but because of Arthur Sterling. It had been 2 weeks since the incident in the deep archives, and the cold, terrifying tyrant of the council had completely vanished. In his place was a man who looked like he had been possessed by an angel of peace. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't clenched his jaw. He hadn't even frowned.
Master Sterling, Senior Counselor Caleb stammered during the morning briefing, dropping a stack of highly classified documents right into a puddle of spilled ink.
I am so sorry. The temporal maps are ruined. A month ago, Caleb would have been banished to the lower wards for such incompetence. I stood in the corner, my hands sweating, my fingers nervously gripping my silver pocket watch. Arthur looked at the ruined maps, then his icy blue eyes immediately shot across the room, locking directly onto me. He took a slow, deep, calculated breath. The frosty blue aura that usually surrounded him began to flicker for a fraction of a second, causing my watch to give a warning tick-tick. But Arthur instantly forced his shoulders to relax, squeezing his eyes shut for a moment. When he opened them, a terrifyingly polite, forced smile was plastered on his face.
"It is quite all right, Caleb," Arthur said, his voice dripping with an unnatural, velvety gentleness that made everyone in the room shiver with fear. "Accidents happen to the best of us. Clean it up, and have it rewritten by next week."
No stress necessary. Caleb gaped at him, his face pale. Wait, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. He scrambled out of the office as if he had just seen a ghost. The moment the double doors clicked shut, Arthur's forced smile dropped. He slumped back into his leather chair, rubbing his temples. "Leo," he groaned softly, his voice lacking any of his public majesty. "Come here." I walked over to his desk, pulling the watch from my pocket. I held it out so he could see the holographic numbers. "You did great, boss. Look, we didn't lose a single minute. In fact, because you were so calm, I actually gained 2 hours of sleep time." Arthur looked up at me, a soft, genuine smile replacing his tired expression. He reached out, his long fingers gently catching the edge of my sleeve, pulling me just a fraction closer. "The council elders think I have lost my mind, Leo."
"Malachi asked me this morning if I had been cursed by a love potion."
"Well, technically, it is a potion of survival." I laughed nervously, my cheeks heating up as his eyes remained fixed on my face. "It is exhausting," Arthur murmured, his thumb brushing against my wrist, right over my pulse point. "But every time I feel my temper rising, I think of your watch. I think of your life bleeding away because of my flaws, and it becomes remarkably easy to stay calm. You are a very effective anchor, Leo." My heart did a dangerous, unauthorized flip. It wasn't the curse anymore. My watch was perfectly stable, ticking in a beautiful, slow rhythm, but my actual, physical heart was beating entirely too fast because of the way he was looking at me. Scene 8. A lockdown in the dark. The peace didn't last. On a late Friday evening, as the rest of the council staff had already left, the sky above the citadel turned a violent, bruised purple. A massive, catastrophic temporal storm, an unpredictable tear in the ley lines, slammed into the mountain. Boom! The anti-magic wards flared bright red, and then, with a deafening groan, the entire citadel's power grid died. The magical lights flickered and went out, plunging Arthur's private office into absolute, suffocating darkness. The emergency isolation barriers slammed down over the windows and doors with a heavy, metallic thud. We were locked in, completely trapped. "Leo? Are you hurt?" Arthur's voice immediately called out through the dark. I heard the rustle of his clothes and his quick, decisive footsteps rushing toward my desk. "I'm fine, boss," I called back, shivering instantly. The anti-magic lockdown had turned off the building's heating system, and the magical drafts coming from the temporal storm were freezing cold. But my magic isn't working. I can't light a candle. Suddenly, a faint, beautiful glow illuminated the darkness. Arthur had opened his gold-etched master pocket watch. A soft, warm golden light radiated from the glass, cutting through the shadows. He was standing right in front of me, his sharp features illuminated by the golden hue. He looked at me, noticed my shivering shoulders, and without a single word, he pulled off his heavy navy wool coat. He stepped closer, draping the heavy, luxurious fabric over my shoulders. It was incredibly warm, smelling intensely of crisp winter air and his expensive, comforting cedarwood cologne.
"Sit," Arthur commanded gently, pulling me down toward the plush leather sofa near the empty fireplace. He sat down right next to me, his tall, broad-shouldered frame pressing against my side to block the cold draft.
"Arthur, you don't have to do this," I whispered, pulling his coat tighter around myself, my face burning in the dark. "Be quiet, Leo," he murmured softly, leaning his head back against the sofa. In the dim golden light of his watch, he looked incredibly vulnerable, the harsh lines of his jaw softening. "The storm outside is dangerous. If the temporal feedback hits the room, it might cause a spike in my stress. I need to be close to you. I need to make sure you are safe." We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the roaring storm outside. I could feel the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of his chest against my shoulder. "Leo," Arthur spoke quietly into the darkness. "Before you messed up that spell, I was completely alone. I thought my only purpose was to be a shield for this kingdom, to be feared and hated so that order could exist.
But these past 2 weeks, trying to keep you alive, I haven't felt this human in 10 years.
He turned his head to look at me, his icy blue eyes holding a deep, passionate warmth that made my breath catch. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out, his long fingers gently cupping my jaw. His touch was so tender, so incredibly gentle, it felt like a silent vow. I do not want to be calm just because of a curse, Arthur whispered, his face closing the distance between us until our breaths mingled in the quiet dark. I want to protect you because you have become the only time that matters to me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a joyful, overwhelming emotion flooding my chest. I leaned into his palm, my eyes fluttering shut. In my pocket, my silver watch began to hum a beautiful, melodic tune, spinning backward at a furious pace. Not out of panic, but because his happiness and my love were literally flooding my life with endless extra hours. Act 4. Synchronized Hearts, the finale. Scene 9. The breaking of the chain. The next morning, the storm cleared, but Arthur refused to let our lives hang by a thread any longer. He spent the entire day locked in the forbidden vaults until he found the final solution, a ritual of chronal disentanglement. Now, we stood in the center of the grand ritual chamber. Complex, glowing runes of blue and gold magic were etched into the stone floor, swirling around our feet like a river of starlight. Arthur held both of my hands tightly. His palms were warm, his grip steady and unyielding. This will require absolute synchronization, Arthur said, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute, unwavering trust. At the exact strike of midnight, we must release our temporal magic at the same microsecond. If we fail, our lifespans will be permanently fractured. We won't fail, I smiled, looking up at him, realizing that the clumsy, terrified intern from 2 weeks ago was completely gone. Standing next to him, I felt brave. I trust you, Arthur. The runes beneath us flared with a blinding, magnificent light. The air grew heavy, vibrating with immense power. Now, Leo, Arthur called out. Together, we closed our eyes and released our magic into the circle. A brilliant explosion of gold and blue light erupted through the chamber, illuminating the ancient stone walls. I felt a sharp, electric pull in my chest. The invisible, heavy chain that had tethered my soul to his gave a violent shudder. With a final, cascading wave of light, the magical pressure dissolved. The runes on the floor faded into dust. I opened my eyes, gasping for air. I quickly reached down to my belt, pulling out my silver pocket watch, my hands trembling. The holographic runes were no longer red, nor were they spinning in a chaotic frenzy. They were glowing a normal, calm, human white. The gears were moving at a perfectly standard, ordinary pace. The curse was gone. The link was safely broken. I was completely free. A sudden, cold wave of realization washed over me. I looked down at my watch, then slowly looked up at Arthur, who was standing just a few feet away, watching me quietly. The curse was over. I was no longer his mandatory shadow. I didn't have a reason to stay in his private office, to brew his Earl Grey tea at exactly 78 degrees, or to follow him into the deep archives. I was just an ordinary, low-level intern again. It worked, I whispered, forcing a small, tight smile onto my face as I began to step backward, out of the ritual circle. You're free, Master Sterling. You can go back to being as angry and strict as you want now. You don't have to worry about killing me anymore.
I'll go back to the lower wards and finish my standard internship.
I turned around, my heart sinking like a stone into my chest, a bitter lump forming in my throat as I took my first step away from him. Scene 10. The choice of time. Before I could even take a second step, a strong hand grabbed my wrist with absolute, unyielding force, pulling me backward. I gasped as I was spun around, my chest colliding hard against Arthur's solid chest. He refused to let go, his arms instantly wrapping around my waist, locking me tightly in his embrace. Who said you are allowed to leave, Leo? Arthur murmured. I looked up, shocked to see a rare, breathtakingly beautiful smile finally gracing his handsome face. His icy blue eyes were no longer cold. They were burning with a fierce, possessive and deeply devoted light. But the curse is broken, I stammered, my face turning bright crimson as I felt the warmth of his body through his shirt. You don't need me near you anymore. The spell is broken, yes, Arthur whispered, leaning down until his lips were brushing against the shell of my ear, his breath sending a shiver straight down my spine. But my heart is not.
I did not spend the last 2 weeks changing my entire world just to let you walk back to the lower wards. Leo.
He pulled back slightly, his warm hands moving up to gently cradle my face, forcing me to look directly into the depth of his devotion. The curse forced us together, but I want you to stay by my choice. I don't want an assistant, and I don't want a shadow. I want you by my side for the rest of my days. I love you, Leo. A breathless, joyful laugh escaped my lips, tears of absolute happiness blurring my vision. I raised my hands, gripping his shirt sleeves tightly, leaning into his warmth with everything I had. You know, if I stay, I'm still going to be a terrible, clumsy intern, boss. I will personally reformat every single budget report in this kingdom if it means I get to keep you. Arthur laughed softly, his forehead leaning gently against mine. Act 2. The Sync Timeline. Scene 11. The morning after the ritual. My eyes fluttered open to the warm, golden sunlight streaming through the tall, arched windows of the High Magical Council's private residential quarters. For the first time in 3 weeks, I didn't wake up screaming. My hand didn't immediately twitch in a panic toward my belt to check if my lifespan was bleeding away. Instead, the first thing I felt was a heavy, warm arm securely wrapped around my waist, pulling me tight against a solid chest. I blinked, my face instantly turning a deep crimson as memories of last night rushed back into my brain. The ritual chamber, the breaking of the chains, and Arthur, confessing his feelings in the dark, telling me his entire time belonged to me now. You're overthinking again, Leo. I can literally hear your panic from here. A deep, groggy, velvet baritone vibrated against my back. Arthur shifted behind me, his silver-gray hair slightly messy on the silk pillows, a sight that would probably cause a collective heart attack among the strict council elders if they ever saw their flawless Grand Chronomage looking so human and domestic. I'm not overthinking, boss, I whispered. My voice caught in my throat as he tightened his grip, burying his face into the crook of my neck. His skin was incredibly hot. You are no longer my intern, Leo. Stop calling me boss in this bed, Arthur murmured. His lips brushed against my shoulder blade, sending a wild shiver straight down my spine. He reached over with his free hand to the nightstand, picked up my silver pocket watch, and flipped it open. The holographic numbers were perfectly stable, glowing a calm, pristine white. It feels so strange, I admitted, turning around in his arms to look directly into his piercing icy blue eyes. In the morning light, they looked soft, filled with a protective devotion that belonged only to me. For weeks my life depended on making sure you didn't frown. Now that the spell is broken, I don't even have a reason to steal your expensive tea anymore. Arthur let out a rare, low laugh that completely melted my heart. He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against mine. Then I will make it an official council decree. From this moment on, you are appointed as my personal temporal advisor. Your desk will remain right inside my office, and your primary duty— He paused for a microsecond, his gaze dropping to my lips before looking back up with intense seriousness— is to ensure I never have a reason to feel alone again. My heart hammered against my ribs from the overwhelming happiness flooding my chest. It was a perfect, beautiful moment. Arthur's gaze instantly turned icy. The soft warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by the sharp, rigid focus of the Grand Chronomage. The peaceful ticking of our watches seemed to grow sharper and louder. The magical communication mirror on the wall flared a brilliant, urgent red. Text runes manifested across the glass. Urgent. High Council emergency meeting. Regional time loop detected in the eastern provinces. Arthur let out a heavy sigh, the cold blue energy of his magic dancing on his fingertips as he slowly sat up from the bed. It seems our peace was short-lived. The elders are already waiting. I sat up next to him, pulling his heavy navy blue robe over my shoulders.
Then let's go, Master Sterling. Let's see what the council has messed up this time.
Scene 12. Secrets and Stairs. The atmosphere inside the grand hall of the Magical Council was tenser than usual as Arthur marched inside, wearing his immaculate, custom-made three-piece suit without a single wrinkle. The whispers among the elders reached a fever pitch. I followed 2 steps behind him, holding a fresh leather binder and trying my best to maintain perfect posture. We had agreed to keep our relationship an absolute secret. If the conservative elders found out that the Grand Chronomage was romantically involved with a former low-level intern, Malachi's faction would use it as political leverage to strip Arthur of his title. Grand Chronomage. High Counselor Malachi stood up the moment Arthur took his seat at the head of the long table. Malachi's sharp eyes darted from Arthur directly to me, narrowing in deep suspicion. Before we discuss the temporal anomaly in the East, I believe we must address a security breach right inside this room. Arthur didn't even flinch. He leaned back in his chair, steeping his fingers in front of his face, and stared at Malachi with an icy, authoritative gaze. A security breach, Malachi? Enlighten me. Your assistant, Malachi sneered, pointing a long, wrinkled finger directly at me. Leo Vance. 2 weeks ago, he shamelessly interrupted a high-level summit, violating every protocol of this council. He claims it was for a metabolic stabilization window. Yet, since that day, your entire disposition has changed. You have stopped executing disciplinary measures. You have pardoned failed projects. The entire ministry is whispering that this boy is using forbidden manipulation magic on your mind. The room went dead silent. My breath caught in my throat. My hand instinctively twitched toward the pocket with my watch, and internal panic began to surge. Arthur stopped tapping his fingers against the table. A heavy, suffocating blue time energy erupted from Arthur's shoulders. It was so dense that several counselors recoiled backward, gasping for air. Even without the curse, seeing Arthur angry was terrifying. But not for my own life, rather for him. I knew how much he hated losing control. Are you suggesting, Arthur spoke, his voice dropping to a deadly, chilling whisper, that a 22-year-old intern has the capacity to bypass my temporal defenses and manipulate my mind, Malachi? I demand an investigation. Malachi barked, refusing to back down. The boy should be suspended from duty and interrogated by the temporal guard. I felt a cold sweat roll down the back of my neck. Suspended. If they locked me away, I wouldn't be able to stay near Arthur. Before the panic could completely paralyze me, I looked at Arthur. His gaze was locked onto Malachi, but his left hand, hidden beneath the edge of the massive mahogany table, was open. Slowly and discreetly, I took half a step forward, letting the fabric of my trousers lightly brush against his fingers. It was a tiny, completely invisible touch, but the moment I stood beside him, I saw Arthur's chest rise and fall in a slow, controlled breath. The freezing blue aura around him stopped expanding. He forced his anger down, not because of a curse, but because he remembered his promise. He wanted to be a protector, not a destroyer. There will be no investigation, Arthur declared smoothly, his voice completely calm, but carrying the absolute weight of Aeon. Leo Vance acted under my direct, confidential orders during the summit. His action saved this council from a severe temporal feedback loop that I was personally monitoring. His position as my personal temporal advisor is permanent. If you question my mind again, Malachi, I will consider it an act of high treason. Malachi's jaw tightened, his face turning an angry shade of purple, but he slowly sank back into his chair, accepting defeat. Now, Arthur said, opening the folder in front of him and returning to his business tone, let us discuss the eastern provinces. An entire village has been trapped inside a repeating 12-hour loop for 3 days. Pack your bags, advised Vance. We leave for the anomaly at dawn. Scene 13. The village out of time. The eastern province of Oakhaven looked like a painting frozen in reality. As Arthur and I stepped out of the magical carriage, the air felt strange, dense, vibrating at a high frequency that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. In the distance, the village square was visible. People were walking, a blacksmith was hammering a piece of iron, and children were playing. But the moment I looked closer, a bell in the town square tolled. Bon. In that exact microsecond, like a film being violently rewound, every single person in the village began to move backward with incredible speed, returning to the exact positions they occupied 12 hours ago, only to start the day all over again. They didn't even realize they were trapped in a cage of time.
The temporal distortion here is colossal, Arthur murmured.
His heavy navy blue coat billowed in the wind as he stood on the edge of the hill, holding his gold pocket watch. The holographic dials on it were spinning furiously counterclockwise, struggling to read the local reality. Can we fix it with a stabilizing tether? I asked, walking closer and checking my own watch. To my surprise, my white numbers flared slightly, staining into a dangerous orange hue. Arthur noticed it instantly. He aggressively grabbed my hand, his long fingers intertwining with mine, and his warm magical energy flooded into my watch, stabilizing its rhythm. Do not let go of my hand, Leo. Inside this anomaly, individual life flows can be violently ripped apart. If you step outside my aura, your clock could jump 50 years forward in a single second. I won't step a single inch away from you, Arthur. I corrected myself with a small smile, squeezing his palm in return. We descended into the frozen village, navigating between the looping citizens. It was eerie. I watched a young man drop a basket at apples, but a second later, the apples flew right back into his basket as the loop reset. The source of the anomaly is inside the old clock tower at the center of the town, Arthur said, examining the magical lines glowing beneath the cobblestones. Someone didn't just break a time artifact here. They intentionally anchored a localized eternity. But why? Suddenly, the wind died down, and an absolute, unnatural silence took over. The blacksmith stopped hammering. The children froze. The entire village didn't just rewind. They all turned their heads simultaneously. Their blank, unblinking eyes locked directly onto Arthur and me. They are not looping, I whispered, feeling my heart drop into pure panic. Arthur, someone is controlling them. Every single citizen began to march toward us in perfect, terrifying synchronization. Their voices merged into a monotone, overlapping chorus that echoed through the empty streets. The Grand Chronomage has arrived. The master of the clock has come to die. Give us your time. Give us your eternity. Arthur instantly stepped forward, shielding me with his body, and drew his silver chronomancy staff from his sleeve. A brilliant, defensive barrier of cold blue light erupted around us, forcing the approaching villagers back. Leo, get behind me, Arthur commanded, his baritone cracking like thunder. This anomaly is not a natural disaster. It's a trap. Someone used forbidden soul-binding chronomancy to turn this entire village into a temporal siphon. They are trying to drain my life spans. Scene 14. The temporal siphon. The villagers slammed their hands against Arthur's defensive shield, their eyes glowing with an unnatural, toxic purple light. With every strike, the blue light of the barrier flickered, and I could see how much strain Arthur was under. His jaw was tightly clenched, and sweat beaded at his temples. I looked down at his gold watch. My breath hitched. The golden runes were spinning like crazy, rapidly counting down his time. The siphon was working. It was draining his magical energy through these people. Arthur, your shield is fueling the siphon. I shouted over the roaring storm. Every time you use magic to block their attacks, they absorb your time. You have to drop the barrier. If I drop the barrier, they will tear you apart. Leo, Arthur roared back, an absolute fierce protectiveness burning in his eyes. I can handle the drain. I will not let them touch you. No, you can't. I panicked, pulling my own watch out. The orange numbers on my dial were starting to cascade downward too, caught in the residual vacuum of the siphon. Think, Leo, think. Survival strategy number 2. When the boss is stubborn, you have to be smarter. I looked down at the magical lines glowing beneath the ground. All of them converged toward the main clock tower behind a crowd. The villagers weren't acting on their own will. They were just nodes in a massive circuit. Arthur, listen to me. I yelled, stepping forward and pressing my back tightly against his. I reached my arms around his waist, gripping his staff right over his fingers. We destroyed our curse when we synchronized our magic. We can do it again. Don't fight the siphon. Overload it. Give them so much temporal energy that the anchor in the tower explodes. Arthur froze for a fraction of a second, his analytical mind instantly calculating my chaotic, desperate plan. A reckless smile, full of sharp, dangerous adrenaline, crossed his handsome face. You truly are the most chaotic intern in the world, Leo. Fine. On my count, release everything you have. Sound effect.
A massive echoing countdown chime. 3, 2, 1.
Now! Together we poured our combined magical energy into the staff. Instead of an alpha defensive shield, a blinding, roaring torrent of golden and blue light erupted outward like a supernova. Sheer volume of our synchronized time energy flooded the circuit. The villagers gasped, recoiling backward as the purple glow in their eyes was completely drowned out by our brilliant gold. The magical lines beneath the cobblestones began to crack, glowing white hot, and the colossal wave of energy rushed straight toward the center of the town. Boom! The top of the old clock tower shattered into a spectacular explosion of stone and silver gears. The massive clock face burst into 1,000 fragments, raining down across the sky like harmless sparkles of light. The wind stopped. The suffocating pressure vanished. The villagers blinked, shaking their heads as the purple fog completely dissolved from their eyes. They looked around in total confusion, suddenly waking up from a 3-day nightmare, entirely safe and returned to their normal timelines. I collapsed to my knees on the cobblestones, gasping for air from pure magical exhaustion. My silver watch settled back into a calm, steady white rhythm. We did it. Arthur immediately dropped his staff and dropped to his knees right in front of me. His strong hands gripped my shoulders firmly, his face pale with worry as he scanned me. "Leo, are you all right? Look at me. Did you lose any time?" "I'm whole. I just need a giant cup of that tea with the moonflower syrup," I breathed out, letting out a weak, happy laugh before simply collapsing forward against his chest. Arthur wrapped his arms around me tightly, burying his face into my hair, his chest heaving with pure relief. "You reckless, beautiful fool," he whispered, his voice noticeably trembling with the depth of his emotions. "You saved me." "Just doing my job, boss," I mumbled into his shoulder, smiling as I felt the steady, perfectly synchronized ticking of our hearts beating as one. Scene 15. The Unseen Shadow. 2 days later, the situation in Oak Haven was completely resolved, and the village returned to the normal flow of time. Arthur and I returned to the High Council headquarters under the cover of night, avoiding the prying eyes of the guards and the elders. We stood inside his private office. The fireplace crackled softly, casting long shadows across the dark mahogany walls. Arthur was standing by the large arched window, looking out at the glowing magical city below. His hands were slipped into his trouser pockets, his dark vest perfectly tailored to his frame. Despite our victory, his profile looked brooding, and a heavy anxiety was written in his icy blue eyes. I walked up behind him, sliding my arms around his waist and pressing my cheek against his broad back. I felt his muscles instantly relax at my touch. "What's wrong, Arthur?" I asked softly. "We saved the village. Your watch is in perfect condition. Why do you still look like you are carrying the weight of the entire world?" Arthur sighed, covering my hands with his large warm palm, lightly squeezing my fingers. "That anchor in the clock tower, Leo, it wasn't a natural malfunction. When the gears shattered, I felt the residual magical signature of the person who cast that forbidden soul-binding spell." I blinked, a cold chill running down my spine. "Whose signature was it?" Arthur turned around in my embrace, looking down at me with an intense, grim seriousness that made my breath hitch. "It belonged to someone inside the High Council. Someone who knew exactly how much energy my defenses would consume. The trap wasn't created to destroy a province. It was a targeted assassination attempt against me." My breathing stopped. The enemy wasn't an anomaly. It was a traitor who sits at the exact same table with us every single morning. "They will try again," I whispered, tightly clutching his shirt from the sudden fear for his safety. "If they know your strength, they will find a way to break you." Arthur leaned down, his long fingers gently touching my chin, tilting my face up until our eyes locked. A stubborn, unyielding light burned inside his icy blue eyes, a light of absolute devotion and determination. "Let them try," Arthur murmured, his voice a deep, velvet promise that sent a thrill straight through my soul. He closed the distance between us, his lips covering mine in a passionate, lingering kiss that tasted like crisp winter air and sweet moonlight. When he pulled back, his thumb gently caressed my cheek, and a soft smile finally broke through his grim expression. "They think they can break my timeline, Leo, but they don't know one thing. As long as my heart beats in sync with yours, I have all the eternity in the world to destroy them."